Hello and welcome back to the brewery. Today we'll brew something that I brew fairly occasionally, maybe once a year at most. But today we're making a lager. Well, a Bock actually. The London Amateur Brewers Club, big club down in London, are running a lagers competition sometime in the new year. So I thought it'd be nice inspiration to make a lager. And Bocks are nice anyway. So what have we got going? We've got the HLT warming up. We've already had our first minor disaster of the morning in that a plug melted. These ones have been quite good actually. These ones haven't melted very much because we run quite a lot of current through these things. So they occasionally get quite hot, but this is the first one I've had properly melt in a while, and these sockets have usually been okay. So we'll need to fix that, which means we're warming up quite slowly on one element. Normally I have two in there, which is quick, but one's quite a lot slower. So that's coming along. What else have we got going on? And obviously we have a starter. I'll talk about the recipe in a bit and how this is done. So this has been a stepped starter. So that started at 1.5 litre starter at about 1045-ish gravity. And then when that had mostly fermented through, I topped that up to 2.5 litres. And in doing so, I added enough DME back into that to take the gravity back up into the 1040s. So rather than decanting, chilling and dumping and all the rest of that complication, I just topped it up a bit higher. Hopefully that'll work. We have loads of yeast. And that's about everything getting ready. So time to weigh out and get the grain ready. And I'll be back in a bit to talk more about lagers. Okay, the mash is on and recirculating through Herm's tank as usual. You can see we're under control there. So while that's going on, a little bit more about this beer, and then later on I'll talk about lagers more generally. So for this beer, the recipe is about 96% Munich malt. So that's in this 20 litre, that's 7.5 kilos, with 200 grams of Cara Munich 2 and about 100 grams of Carafa Special 1, just to give it a bit more colour. All Munich's not something I've done before. Apparently it works fine. It should give us a nice rich bready malty beer. When we get on to the boil, we're going to be using just some Hallertau Magnum for bittering and some Mittelfrüh later on to give a little bit of flavour. And we'll be fermenting with the yeast we saw before over here. This one, that's the Bock lager yeast, which from memory I'll go and remind myself whose yeast it is and talk about that in a later part of the video. So hopefully that's useful, and I will see you later on. Right, we're back and we're sparging away now. So, whoa, pumping and running off slowly. A little bit more about brewing lagers. A lot of people tend to think that brewing lagers is really complicated, but it doesn't really need to be. You definitely do need fermentation temperature control of some kind, some way of keeping the temperature down while the beer is fermenting. But beyond that, you can operate much as a normal beer. In this case, just on a simple single infusion mash. Alright, my kit's ridiculously complicated, but there's no need for all of that. You don't need to do any of the complicated things that some people do for lagers, like decoctions. They're ridiculously complicated. Well, not ridiculously complicated, they're quite hard work. And adds to your brew day, they're really not necessary in most cases. But they are quite fun. So your mash is pretty much the same as any other beer. You pick your mash temperature for the body you want. Then the rest of your brew day is pretty much as normal. It's only when you get to fermentation that it's a little different. You have a couple of choices. Traditionally, you ferment usually somewhere around 10 to 12 degrees C for quite a long time. You can take a lot longer than normal fermentation, maybe another week or so. Or nowadays people are suggesting you use a fast ferment method where you start at the lower temperature and after a few days you can start bringing it up to more towards an ale temperature. I've tried both of these in the past. And while I think the traditional method does work better and produce a better beer, the fast ferment method also works pretty well. It's worth mentioning the other thing you do with fermentation at the end. Right at the end, you bring the temperature up maybe 5 degrees for a day or two. This is a diacetyl rest and tries to get the yeast to finish off all the diacetyl, which is it's on the pathway for producing alcohol, and a little bit of heat helps it out. At that point, you can then go into lagering. There's a couple of choices here again. You can either do it in your fermenter, doesn't really matter, you'll be on the yeast, but it's usually okay. Or you can bottle or keg it and do it then. Just drop it down to 2 or 3 degrees and keep it there for a month or so. I quite often do it by sticking it in a keg and just putting it in the kegerator, which usually stays at about 2 to 3 degrees. Okay, that's really all there is to making lagers. They're not as hard as many people think, so give it a go. Right, we're getting to the end of the boil and are recirculating. Not chilling yet, but just recirculating to let everything cool down again. Cool down, sterilise. And while we're here, additional thoughts on lagers and brewing lagers. It's interesting that not very many people brew lagers compared with the ale styles. There's all sorts of interesting stuff, especially in the non-standard lagers. I mean, one of the few styles I haven't brewed is an American light lager, because I probably would never end up drinking it. I mean, American light lager is obviously a brewing challenge. It's well known as a brewing challenge because there's nothing to hide behind. There's no flavour there. So even the slightest off flavour is really obvious. But, well, when you make a beer, you need to be able to drink it, and I really don't like lagers. But the other German styles are all quite interesting. I mean, Bock's, I've brewed a couple of Doppelbocks. I brewed Fest beers, well, actually more the Marzen styles, the old Fest beer style. And they're all really good beers. People should brew them more. They're a little bit tricky, but only in the fermentation. So hopefully I encourage more people to brew the odd lager here and then. One quick diversion from talking about lagers to show people what I do with cooling water. Obviously this is nearly boiling, so best thing to do with it is clean the mash tun. Then you don't waste water and you don't waste the heat. Saves a lot of energy. While I'm talking about cleaning, one of the other things I'm trying out at the moment is the Malts Miller's new brewery cleaner thing. It's called something like Magic Cleaner or something, amazing brewery thing, which is either rebranded PBW or a recipe that's usually called fake PBW, or which are really close. Looks like it's doing the job. Seems to foam up a chunk more than straight what's it called? Stuff I normally use. Sodium bicarbonate. So we'll see how that does and see if I have a nice shiny mash tun later on. Now we're cooling away. You can probably hear the water running in the background. And, well, one of the advantages of brewing lager in the winter is that my cooling system has more or less got it down to a lager fermentation temperature, which is not something that's ever happened before. Okay, we've finished transferring and now doing some oxygenation. Since I've been having some fermentation trouble, I'm giving it a burst of this, which claims to be pure oxygen. I'm sure it increases the yeast's concentration. It's concentrating very hard. I hope it works really hard at that. But now I've got an aquarium pump, just giving it some air through a stone in there at the moment. Some people use a micron filter in this line. I've never found that necessary. Obviously, I'm pumping air into it, which probably contains some bugs. But I'm going to shove a load of yeast in, which should overcome that pretty quickly. There we go. Let's see how that goes. Okay, so that's the Bock, all tucked away in the fermentation fridge, getting to the right temperature, ready for pitching. And that's pretty much it for today. So get brewing those lagers, enter them in the London Amateur Brewers competition, and I will see you in another video.